Hey everyone, and welcome to The Index, where we talk with the leading entrepreneurs, builders, and investors building the future of the internet. We do this because we believe that people are worth knowing, and we want to share their stories behind why they are here striving for a better future. I'm your host, Alex Kehaya, and today I'm excited to welcome Alex Pruden, CEO of Aleo, the first decentralized open source platform designed to enable private and programmable applications. Aleo brings together an ecosystem of expert technologists, developers, and digital rights advocates who use zero-knowledge proofs to build a better, more secure internet for everyone. Alex, thanks so much for being here. I want to start off by just saying, we've talked about having you on the show since we met each other in Vienna. We were at this niche cryptocurrency. It was like infrastructure conference, like future of the internet type thing, and it was actually put on by Daniel Huang, and then you guys were a sponsor. Solana Foundation was a sponsor. Daniel's going to come on the show later next year, so everybody's going to get to hear from him. But that is the future of the internet. This is the thing that like most people don't know about is that the hardware, that actual physical hardware, the wires that connect everything together. And we had like the top 100 or 200 so people working on that in our space in the same room. It was so interesting. But I'm just so happy to have you here. I want to hear, first I want to start off as like, why are you here? Not here in the show, but why are you here building in this space? And then we can kind of get into Aleo and talk about that.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm really excited for this conversation. And so maybe I could just start off and answer the question why I'm here and give a little bit of background on myself to introduce myself to your audience, and hopefully that'll answer the question at the same time. So I actually don't have a technology background at all. I was from a military family growing up, and I joined the Army shortly after 9/11, and had a 15-year Army career. And in the early part of my Army career, I was at the military academy, and so that's like effectively a college. And so you pick a major, and my majors were international relations and Arabic. So decidedly non-technical. I technically do have a Bachelor of Science because every graduate of a military academy gets one, but I just didn't focus at all on technology. And I basically thought that my future was just going to be as a military officer. And so I had, after I graduated from the academy, I had the remainder of my of the next 9 years in my Army career. I spent across 3 deployments in the Middle East, one to Afghanistan, one to Iraq, and one to Turkey, where we were training some of the Syrian rebels who were fighting the Assad regime at the time. And I got first introduced to crypto actually working with those folks, right? Because cryptocurrencies, I think a lot of times in the West, and particularly in the United States, we have the benefit of all of these very robust systems, financial in particular, that we as American citizens enjoy. I mean, the most obvious one is the U.S. dollar. We're like, I can kind of go anywhere in the world and just whip out a dollar, and it's good for some good or service, right? Basically anywhere you go. And that's just not true of most places. And I think it's something that is very easy to take for granted. And, when I was working with a lot of these Syrian folks, the particular problem that I kind of witnessed them facing is like, these are people that generally play their, for the most part, play their whole lives by the rules, and we're just kind of working every day for a paycheck, put some money in the savings, put their kids through school, standard kind of every human dream of, a typical life arc, right? And then, one day a civil war broke out in Syria, lines got a bit arbitrarily drawn, and if you were on the wrong side of it, whether or not you were kind of part of it or not, you were just blacklisted from the financial system in Syria, effectively, which means your bank account was frozen, your house became a legitimate target for bombardment, right? So your real property was basically under threat. And the people that could got away with their lives, but for the most part, lost almost all of their wealth. And, part of the reason for that is because the Syrian pounds that they earned their living in just didn't mean anything when they crossed a border into Turkey, or if they had identity documents that they couldn't, for whatever reason, take in time, right? Or if they lost them in the process of fleeing, like now they literally are stateless. They have no ability to ever cross another border anywhere, right? So that's kind of how I got interested in blockchain technology, and particularly Bitcoin. In the beginning, I was kind of like saw these people who lost everything, and I'm like, wow, Bitcoin. The first thing that I was introduced to is like, this is an amazing technology. It enables me to like put I have a I was an Army guy, right? It's a simple dude. So I'm like, okay, I memorized the password, and now my bank account goes with me wherever, right? It's obviously a very simplistic way to look at Bitcoin, but I think it does get at what really the value proposition of that particular network is, right? It's just self-sovereign money that you can take with you wherever you go, and it's good wherever you go. And that's what got me into the space. So yeah, so that for me is really why I'm here. And I guess kind of reflecting back on, and I gave a talk about this when I was still an investor at A16Z. And I guess maybe just to complete the story. So I left the Army, went to Stanford, started the Stanford Blockchain Club, got a job working at A16Z on the first crypto fund. So I got some investment experience in the space, and decided to go build an Aleo, which you already described, and now I'm the CEO. But yeah, reflecting on my military career and the time I spent overseas in particular just gave me an appreciation for all these systems that we take for granted. And I think the potential for decentralized, permissionless versions of many of these fundamental systems like money, I think have the potential to really transform our economy and, society, honestly, in a way that makes life a lot better, in a way that ensures the values and liberties that we take for granted, but really deeply value in the West. So for me, that's why I'm here. And that's why I'll never leave this industry, because first off, it's just a very exciting industry to be in. But second off, it feels like there's a very fundamental reason or a fundamental way in which this technology is helping to improve the world, in my view.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for sharing that, and that I have family members in the military, and so I understand family and friends, like a decent number. I understand the sacrifice that it takes to do that job, both for you personally and also your wife and kids and all that stuff. So thank you for your service.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And you kind of glossed over this, but I feel like, and we can edit this out if you want later, but you were in the special forces. You were not just in the Army, okay? So for people listening, he's legit.
Yeah, I guess I should say, I was an infantry officer, which is so I got combat experience in Afghanistan as an infantry officer, and then when I was training the Syrian guys, I was a Green Beret. So that as a Green Beret, the mission of a Green Beret is you get dropped in. There's 12 of you, and you basically create your own army with whoever is there with you. In this case, it was the Syrians, right? So yeah,
amazing. Yeah. And I just love your story because, you saw firsthand we actually hadn't had this conversation before. And this is part of the reason I'm so interested in Aleo is because I worked at Orchid and I got really close to the privacy sector and that whole conversation. And I started my first podcast when I was at Orchid called Follow the White Rabbit. And so many people that I had on that show that were from
awesome name for
emerging
a podcast,
markets. Yeah, it was great. I loved that name. We went, so many people that I talked to, I talked to this one Ukrainian guy from Venezuela, Bitcoin equals freedom. That is what it equals for them. And that is what crypto and the values of Web3 are about freedom. It's about I think most of the values that America stands for, right? Being able to securely own your property, right? I think is a human right. You should be able to have that. Things like privacy. And so this is now technology driven in a way that can't be revoked because we're using cryptography. And this is kind of getting into why I kind of obsess over Aleo is because I think it's really interesting. So you talk about Stanford, right? My understanding, the founders of Aleo, they're PhDs.
Berkeley.
They're some of the leading Berkeley okay.
Guys. So I'm the only Stanford guy, so we have a little rivalry internally at Aleo. But yeah,
my point is is that they're some of the leading minds in zero knowledge proof technology, which I would argue that if crypto hadn't become so big, ZKP, which is the acronym for zero knowledge proof, would not have gotten nearly the funding that it's gotten. It's kind of interesting to think about how crypto has pushed cryptography and things like zero knowledge proof kind of to the next level through billions of dollars in funding. It's created this economic flywheel that's made it make sense to do that from a private sector perspective. So I would just first of all, for people who are listening who don't know anything about zero knowledge proofs, let's start at the bottom here and work our way up. Explain what that is and why that's so important. And then I would love to get into the advances Aleo is bringing to cryptography and the general ZKP area bucket.
Certainly.
Let's start at the beginning.
Yeah, and I just want to respond to something you said earlier because I think it's important, right? So these, again, I talked about my motivations for being in this space, and these sound like we share several of the same motivations, right? It's these values, these freedoms, these liberties, which are important. And, again, I think it's easy for us, for people in the U.S., in America, or in Western Europe, or just generally the developed world, to kind of just take all this stuff for granted. It's like, everything's kind of fine. My life's okay, right? But like, actually, if you look at the advent of the internet and how the paradigm of how information is shared and used compared to pre-internet, like actually the world and your personal space has collapsed massively, right? Like every time you press enter on a keyboard, in fact, you don't have to press enter. You click on a page and you move your mouse 1 inch. Oftentimes, all of those interactions are recorded in a way that is candidly very Orwellian, and you don't notice it, you don't feel it, but like it's the same in the same way like you drive your car and like carbon dioxide goes out the back. You don't really feel it, but it is bad in a sense, right? And so like, and I think people have just kind of gotten used to this new paradigm that honestly, even since the 70s with the Bank Secrecy Act, has kind of like made the new normal, right? Where it's like, hey, you actually have to give up all this information that you didn't have, like that people a century ago would view shocking in terms of the amount of information you have to share. So, and crypto, I think, is part of it. And I agree absolutely that a big part of the, I think one of the most exciting technologies that has kind of come out of like cryptocurrency and blockchain is zero knowledge cryptography. It's an application for zero knowledge cryptography that has caused there to be a lot of funding come in, which is great because I think zero knowledge cryptography in general has a ton of application for the internet generally, right? This ability, and now we're going to answer the question, what is zero knowledge cryptography? Zero knowledge cryptography, put simply, is a technique for proving a fact is true without revealing why it's true. Like the very simple, like layman example I like to give is like poker, right? So Alex, you or I are playing poker. I have a hand, you have a hand. It's like, okay, time to show our cards. Like, I'm like, hey, I have a full house, right? And for you to believe that I have a full house, you have to physically see my cards, right? So I have to like show you my cards. And there's always been this, in the physical world, there's this tension, or there's this always this kind of spectrum between like trust and verification, right? You either have to trust me that I'm not lying, or you have to see it for yourself. And the amazing kind of magical, the reason why I think people equate zero knowledge crypto to magic is that like it breaks this spectrum, right? I can cryptographically prove to you that I have a full house, and you never have to see my cards. Like it's like that's the physical analog, but it doesn't exist in the physical world. It's this uniquely cryptographic construction which uniquely exists in the digital world. So again, it's proving a fact is true without revealing why. And it's like, poker is a simple example. There's other examples. Another one I like to use is like, you go to a bar, you show your ID. Are you over 21 or not? I mean, there's a ton of information on your ID that's irrelevant to the question. Wouldn't it be nice to kind of just prove, yes, I'm over 21 without showing your birthday, right? Same idea. So all of these things seem simple toy examples, but the reality is you can build a ton of really interesting systems that give you all of the benefits of like the internet and digital technology without forcing you to have to reveal everything as a rule. So to me, that's the reason why I'm very excited about it.
I want to give a couple of examples too of the way the internet currently exists. Back to your like earlier thread there. Two things. Go read, if you're listening to this, go take a look at TikTok's terms of service and understand the level of surveillance that they have on you. Okay, that's number one. The second one is I recently got.
Throw away your phone after you read that.
Yeah, and then just throw away your phone. Like, break your phone, get a new number, and start from scratch without TikTok on your phone. Like I distribute content on TikTok mainly to reach people, but I do not use TikTok on my phone. It's not on my devices.
Yeah. Same.
The other one is I like Discord. I think we all, especially in our industry, we use Discord a ton. But I reinstalled Discord on my new MacBook. I just got a new MacBook like the other day. And I got this, like Apple has gotten a lot better about their privacy protection stuff. So like they've started alerting me, for example, like this app has access to your, all your photos for the last 6 months. Do you want to revoke that? Well, they gave me this alert that said like, hey, Discord wants to track all your keystrokes across all applications. Do you want to allow that? Keystrokes mean like every button you push, back to Alex's example, like literally every button I push, Discord has been tracking that stuff. And I gave them my permission without really knowing that that's what they were doing. And I'm certain they're doing it. I mean, the optimist in me wants to believe they're doing it for reasons that help them provide a better service or something. But like, dude, they'd have no right to track. Every keystroke means they can track when I type in my password to my bank account. Okay. Everything. That is a problem. And zero knowledge proofs will allow companies to provide whatever level of service they think they need to provide to you with that data. They can do that without actually seeing the data. So they don't actually get my password. They just can know that, like, I went to Bank of America or something. I don't know. And maybe I don't want that, but I'm just saying it's better than the current state of affairs.
And to be clear, like, obviously, like, there's a very dystopian possible world where Discord is just recording all of or probably more likely TikTok. It's like, creating AI-powered avatars based on our conversations, whatever, right? Like, so there's, like, obviously very dystopian fears. The reality, the more mundane reality is probably like, look, these are businesses. They're trying to make more money. And they're like, how is Alex spending his time? Let's, like, cater ads to Alex, right? Is that bad? I mean, it's annoying. Is it? But not necessarily bad. But, the question is, what could you do with that? And once you've given up that information, you can never make it private again. This is kind of the interesting thing about privacy is, like, once you reveal information, well, it's out there. Like, it's not like you can hide it again. It's like, again, there's not like a parallel in the physical world. I can, like, put a mask on my face and then take it off and then put it back on and then I can go back out in the world. That's not how information works, right? Like, information is out there. It's always out there and it can't be hidden. So, but I think, there's the aspect from the individual on the right side, but there's actually a very practical business aspect here too, because a lot of companies, take Visa, for example, or like financial services companies, there is actually, thankfully in the West in particular, we get to take advantage of, a robust legal system. And there are laws around, hey, you have customer data or sensitive, personally identifiable information, like, you need to protect that. And honestly, it costs companies a lot of money to do that. And if you have and we've had many conversations in the context of partnerships at Aleo, where we're like, hey, what if you want to let consumers KYC or prove their age or something without revealing information? They're like, wait, we don't have to like put this on our databases. And I'm like, yes. And they're like, well, that sounds awesome because that saves us a ton of money, right? So there's a commercial
cryptographically, you're proving that, like, it's not because there are other KYC providers, right? But that data lives on someone's database.
It's somewhere. Someone is paying to secure it. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And so now the technology you guys provide means that it lives inside of this cryptographic proof. So it's safe, right? Like, in theory, I mean, I guess I would love to dive deep into the security, because like, how does that work? Like, there's no way to get the actual data once it's in the black box. Like, you can't actually see that it's me, like my name and my address and stuff like that. Like, are there security risks where, like, is there a private key somewhere that if someone gets that private key, then they have access to all the data? How does that work?
Yeah. So let me describe Aleo in a little more complete way so we can kind of contextualize for everybody what it is. So there's two aspects to Aleo. There's a blockchain, right, which I define as a permissionless network of nodes that are kind of following some set of rules. And there's, some concept of a virtual machine where, like, one node says, hey, I want to change this entry in the ledger. I want to do this action. And then everybody, comes to consensus about that. And then there's this, what is being come to consensus about? Well, it's like basically actions taken in the context of these zero knowledge proofs, right? So this is what we call our VM, right? And the equivalent here is, like, you have the Ethereum blockchain, which is kind of just about tracking state and state changes. And then you have the EVM, and that's what determines how those state changes happen. Same concept in Aleo. We call our blockchain layer Snark OS. This is the logic of the nodes. And Snark VM is like the logic of basically the world computer in our case. Or in this case. And so how it works is, let's take the age verification example, right? So potentially you want to have some kind of age verification type flow where I don't want any server to have my data. What do I do? Well, first off, you need, in the identity context, we need like a root of truth. So in this case, let's say like a government issued ID, my driver's license, right? So what you would do effectively is you would scan the RFID chip on your driver's license, and then cryptographically verify that signature against the PKI provided by the government agency. You would, inside of a zero knowledge proof, inside of Aleo's Snark VM, you would prove, hey, I have an identity document with a valid signature from the issuing authority. And then you're basically adding that to a set of valid encrypted identity documents on the blockchain, right? So only you can read it. So there is a private key there, right? Your private key decrypts this, we call them records, on the Aleo blockchain, right? And then once that record exists, you can then prove facts about that record. And how does that look? You're basically like, hey, I'm proving that I have the private key to decrypt this record without revealing that private key. And then I'm proving that this record is one of the valid records in the set. And thirdly, I'm proving that, like, whatever the question being asked, is Alex over 18, 21, under 35, whatever it may be. I'm definitely not under 35, by the way. But like whatever the question is,
I'm not.
You can just great. So you can just you can just prove it, right? So that's how it works at a pretty low level. So in short, yes, there are private keys, and like it's kind of, this isn't really like removing the danger of like a private key loss or removing the fact that couldn't be a breach somewhere. But the way I like to paint it is like the way the paradigm works today with secure information or with information that's valuable is it's all in a bank vault. And the bank, like think of the bank vault as like, I mean, you could think of it as literally your bank with all of your private information, or a credit bureau. Imagine what would happen if one of those got hacked. Unthinkable, right?
But like that's happened before.
Oh yeah, well, who would have thought?
Was it like?
Right?
Who was it? It was like a huge one. Equifax, right? Yeah, it's like great.
I mean, and like,
thanks.
and I'm like, I was in the military, so I had a top secret clearance, which required not only all of my personally identifying information, but names and addresses of closest next of kin and fingerprints. And that was the OPM, Office of Personnel Management, handled all that, and they were hacked in 2013, right? So somewhere out there on the internet,
that makes my heart sink.
So like
so dangerous.
Exactly. So the point is, there's like, the OPM, Equifax, Visa, whatever, all these companies.
There's $1 billion customer right there for Aleo, right? Like, if you're listening, anybody at that agency, we're not mad. Just call up. DM Alex, please.
I mean, if they're listening to this podcast, I will make my outlook on life a lot better. So I'd be very happy to hear that. But
I'm actually going to send this. So, my first guest ever was Rich Staropoli, who used to be on Follow the White Rabbit, and he was the CIO of the Department of Homeland Security under Trump. First guest.
Oh, really?
So
wow.
He's going to get this episode, and I'm going to fast track him to this bookmark here.
Nice.
He's got to know a guy.
Nice. Well, so you have these bank vaults, right? And what Aleo is effectively allowing you to do is take the bank vaults and go from the bank vault world to everyone has their own locker, right? And you have a locker with a lock on it. And the key thing here is that the bank vault is only marginally harder to crack into than the individual lockers, right? Like someone can do a phishing email to me, someone can do a bunch of stuff and recover my private key potentially, but you got to remember, hacking and computer security is all about the economics. It's the cost of attack versus the profit of success, right? In the bank vault case, the cost to attack is like zero, and the profit of success is massive. So that's why inevitably, and that's why you see systems like the OPM, Equifax, that are theoretically defended with hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a year, get hacked, because eventually, because the cost of attack is zero, the attackers will find a way in given enough time. I mean, even very recently, Okta, right? Okta is like this OAuth provider for like every major tech platform. They got hacked, right? They literally were entrusted. Yeah, this was like a couple months ago. Their whole job was to not get hacked, right? But again, it's this concept of the bank vault. The kind of the payoff for getting in is so high, and the cost to just continually try to get in is so low that it kind of like, it's just, you would expect this. Now in the world where everyone's information is in lockers, you got to remember, like, the cost to attack is still low, but the payoff is also super low. And maybe if you have to attack it 1 billion or 1 billion times per locker to get in, then the economics start to break, right? Because if someone breaks into my locker, they only get my information. Now that's bad, but also like my locker is like encrypted. My name isn't on the locker. So like, how is someone actually going to know it's my locker, right? So you make it effectively, from a hacker's perspective, way less attractive to go and hack into all this information. So that to me is like, when I talk to cybersecurity professionals, this is how I describe Aleo, right? Because fundamentally what it is, you have this permissionless platform which lets you own your own information and therefore secure your own information and have access to it, and then prove facts about it, right? So you can still get access to these services and products that you want, still benefit from a personalized experience without having to like give up control of this information that we value.
Yeah, I mean, this is why Aleo is so exciting to me, right? I think it has, because look, I think that the enterprise path is actually the way to mass adoption for this kind of technology, because it solves 100%. A real business problem that most users are not really that aware of still, right? Like, we all still just sign up for the app. We all just still click in that login with the Google button on this, whatever it is that you're signing up for. We don't really think about it. Even I'm guilty of this, and I'm like pretty educated, because I like the convenience. you know?
Totally.
And so, but there's real risk for the companies financially, right? If they screw this up. And so, and maybe that's the way it should be. Maybe it should be on them. You know, it shouldn't be on the consumer to have to really think about this. And it kind of goes back to what you're talking about, the economic impact. Like the economic incentives have to be there for them to want to do it. And it sounds like they are. So I would love to, so like you guys are launching, like what can you talk about as far as that goes, like where everything is and what's coming?
Yeah, so we've been on a long journey. We started Aleo 4 years ago, just about, and I actually wasn't there at the very beginning. I was still at A16Z, and I actually knew the founders. Is a guy by the name of Howard Wu, is one of the four original co-founders, and he's kind of like, as you mentioned before, he's like one of these like geniuses who kind of helps like get build up this space to what it is. And I heard he was launching a company. And I got to know him in the process of his seed fund raise, which A16Z didn't end up participating in, but I was really inspired by, so I left A16Z to join the company in late 2020. So about 3 years ago since I've been here. And then we've been through multiple iterations of like what the network looks like, how everything, should be built, etc. And we're finally at the point where we're getting ready to launch Mainnet in January 31st. So really excited about being able to set a date, and we feel pretty confident about
less than 2 months, man. That's a line in the sand. Y'all must be ready.
2 months.
Let's go.
It's simultaneously exciting and terrifying, because like the closer you get, the more work there is. I think anybody who's worked in this space and these networks knows.
100%.
It's a lot. It's a lot that goes into these things, and I definitely have a newfound respect for every single founder of every single network that's ever launched, because it is a highly non-trivial thing. So,
well, Totally talks about this a lot, like, on Twitter about Solana and how interesting it is that these networks are really about social coordination. You're creating an economy around validating the network, writing the transactions on the blockchain that prove all of these things we're talking about, that like actually run the network. And that's a bunch of people. It's like a huge amount of people, and starting that engine, getting it going is like the first really hard thing to do, because the value, like you can kind of look at Aleo and the people involved and how much money you've raised, and you can kind of extrapolate the value that's going to be created, the economic value that's going to then create all of this functionality and capability. But you still have to like make people believe. They have to invest time and money.
Totally.
And any entrepreneur who's built like a traditional business will understand how hard that is to like pre-sell their but also it's like you're pre-selling to them, building a business on Aleo, not like they're not buying a product or something. They're building a business that's contributing to the network. And that is just like a fundamentally different thing. You're bootstrapping like an entire mini country of people.
Exactly.
And it's a crazy experience to be a part of. But and I feel like we're in such a unique time in history to be even able to do it. It feels very lucky.
Yeah. It's like, it's one of those things that, it's funny. I'm really glad you brought up the social aspect, because I think it's so true, right? And I think because the reality is, like, you take a typical Web 2 product, or like, let's take the latest and greatest one, like ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT is like exists in kind of the paradigm, like, the financial and technological paradigm that we've all kind of come to take for granted, right? Whereas this, like Web3 and blockchains like Solana or Ethereum or Aleo, right, are kind of trying to rebuild that entire paradigm. Like, you're kind of like, think about you renovating a house, you take it to the studs, like that's one thing. And then there's another thing to like dig up the foundation and build a new foundation, right? That's kind of what this is, right? And as a result, the social aspect is critically important. And the thing that I love most about my journey into crypto is like, typically people that like start out, they're like, okay, I have a gap in the technological understanding. Like, what is the tech? What is consensus? What is ZK? All this stuff. And then like, eventually you kind of realize, like, because you're talking about commodities and assets that are being issued by this network. And kind of you realize another gap in most people's heads is like, what is money? Like, honestly, most people do not understand the concept of money. Like, the dollar bill in your pocket, what is it valuable for? And if you stop and think about it for a second, you're like, well, because everyone else values it, right? And that's really basically the answer, is everyone around you thinks it's worth something, so it's worth something. Same principle applies here, right? This code is open source. Alex, you could take you could literally go to our GitHub repo right now, start your own Aleo, and be like, this is the canonical Aleo, everyone. This is the thing that this is my idea, whatever, right? I could do the same with Tolly, right? And Solana, I could be like, hey guys, I'm the real genius. Totally stole this idea from me, right? And the question is, will this have value? And it only has value if people believe it, right? And so that's why it's fundamentally, there's like a level of like missionariness that you have to take to this, like, because you have to convince people that like, hey, the existing paradigm that you're operating on has its flaws, and I'm asking you to take a leap into this new paradigm. And it's a bit of a leap of faith, right? In many cases, because like the world, all these applications that we talk about that enable this new world don't exist yet, right? But they could exist, and they will exist in this new paradigm if given enough time. But you need to get the people alongside you to build together, because there's no way for any individual to do it alone because of the social aspect.
Yeah, and this has been probably for me one of the most exciting parts of crypto is like how do you build the physical, how do you bootstrap the physical infrastructure of a network? Because these networks are should be run by like thousands of people someday, right? Individuals who are operating hardware, running open source software, and essentially powering all the products that you're offering to these enterprises. And that is if you look at how Web 1.0, Web 2.0 were built, it's in centralized data centers controlled by a few companies, right? Like a handful, maybe less than a dozen, control all of the internet. There's two of them that control. One controls like 60% of the internet goes through their pipes. There's another one that has a third of the internet going through its pipes. So when you think about that, and then that's the foundation that you're talking about, and you ask like 10,000 people to run that business essentially individually. I'm almost intimidated even talking about it, but that's also why it's so exciting. It's like, how do we do this? How do we get that physical infrastructure spread out all over the world and run by these individuals? And you're not, the reality is you're never going to get completely away from that centralization, because you need data centers, you need interconnection, you need wires and stuff, but the economics change pretty significantly and are spread out between a lot more people, which is, I think, better.
This is a very complex stack of technologies, right? You've referenced the physical hardware several times, and like even inside a computer or a server, there's like a stack of different hardware. There's like the silicon, there's like the wires connecting the different parts of the chip. There's different chips, and there's like even specialized chips like GPUs, of course, these days for AI are important. So it's like there's like just this huge stack of things. Within that stack, there's different parts that obviously have very clear returns to scale. Tim Wu is very famous for his like the master switch book, where it's like whoever's like laying the cables basically just gets a free monopoly, because no one else really is incentivized to lay the cables after that, right? There's always going to be dynamics at certain kind of layers of the stack, or parts of the chain, right, or parts of the business chain. But I think the cool thing about the participation of everybody, and honestly, like what you described about like everyone kind of owns a piece of this. This actually isn't that different. So you said Web 1 and Web 2, and I would actually disagree. I think Web 1, the pioneers of Web 1, like Tim Berners-Lee and the people that started the internet, actually, the vision was actually like, you run an SMTP server for email like in your house, and like
I consider that like Web 0. That was Web like 0, right? That was like Web 0. That's like my business partner Brian Fox, one of the co-founders, the original technical co-founder of Orchid, like wrote the Bash shell. He has told me war stories of being like in a cafe using email. There's like internet cafe back then, and like the people using internet in there and like email, whatever the first version of SMTP powered email, they like all knew each other. Like they were all like researchers at different universities. Like
exactly. It was like ARPA. Like the internet came from ARPANET, and it was like a bunch of universities. They're basically connected, and people just ran these things on their computers. And why did you go from that to like the Web 2 Google runs everything world? Because there was no economic incentive. Like basically you're doing it for free. So like, basically the limit is how charitable an individual feels. And you mentioned like before, and I do the same thing. It's like, as consumers, oftentimes over time, people are driven to choose convenience, right? And that's why Web 2 kind of happened the way it did, where you have these big centralized architectures. But now that the amazing cool thing about Web 3 is that you have inherent in these networks this concept of value that can basically now incentivize you to run your own SMTP server effectively, right? Like in the simplest way that this first happened was like, mining back in the day, like Bitcoin mining. Now I get Bitcoin mining to be clear, it's like it obviously transformed, big business returns to scale, but like in the beginning, there actually was like a lot of this, like people ran like
in
like
their
a GPU
basements.
just like
Yeah.
ran in their basement or their garage, right? And like in a sense, it was actually very much that. And I think you can still even though Bitcoin mining is nothing like that today, I think that principle can actually be replicated. And at least the idea of like having real ownership over not only these applications, but the infrastructure that they run on. And I think as a result, the total value created is much, much greater. And it's also
orders of
much more
magnitude greater.
democratic. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like another I think really important way to tie this all together is that these economic incentives that they're basically they're token driven, usually on chain with cryptography proving the programmed economic model. That plus social coordination is how open source software accrues value.
Totally.
And
Exactly.
and it's like there have been some successful open source companies like Red Hat, right? Multi-billion-dollar company. But the use of open source software to power an economy that has like on-chain economic policies essentially, that's what I think the real revolutionary thing of crypto was and is still to this day. And I think again though, like there have been a lot of projects that have not built anything really that useful. There have been a lot of projects that have built things that are useful or money-making ventures, but really only for crypto native people. And then there's things like Aleo, and there are very few of those things. Like I have high hopes for you guys and the enterprise value you can bring. So yeah, I just feel like pointing that out. Like there are not that many projects that I see that I'm like, okay, this has real enterprise value where there's a huge pain point and you have a unique solution that is like orders of magnitude better that companies will switch to. So I guess, is there any alpha there? Like, I know you've been talking to partners, like, is there some things you can share about like who's going to be using Aleo? I guess you keep calling it
I call it
Aleo.
So I guess like at this point,
I call it Aleo.
This is a decentralized network. Everyone can have their own pronunciation. You know?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Is
I
yours
keep calling it
better?
the
Is
wrong-
mine better? We'll find out. You know? The founders call it Aleo, rhymes with paleo,
Aleo.
but we even have advisors who have a different pronunciation. So I would say, yeah, it's not worth quibbling over. But
We're not going to split hairs.
Yeah.
I got you.
But yeah, look, I mean, I think like for the applications and what are people using on this today? I mean, look, I think finance is an area that people are really interested in, right? I mean, it seems simple because you're like, okay, well, blockchains kind of cover finance already, so like, how is Aleo different? But like, the existing decentralized networks don't cover all of finance necessarily, though. In fact, they only cover a small sliver, in my view. Why? Because, well, the UX of the existing financial system is privacy preserving effectively, right? Through a bank, at least. Like, sure, the bank may know, but like the rest of the world doesn't know. My favorite question to ask at every crypto conference, whenever I'm on a panel, like, how many people in here receive their salary exclusively in crypto? And inevitably there's like one or two, and the 100 other people in the audience don't raise their hand. And why is that?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like crypto has just came out. I mean, this has been around for 10 years. We've all been building it. Why is that? Why? Well, because there's this kind of like social expectation around what do I make as a salary that like you don't want the entire world to know. That's why even though we're building new financial rails, no one takes their salary on them, right? Because the privacy doesn't exist there. And even aside from like the consumer, what am I making? I don't want my neighbor to know. There's like businesses, right? If you're a business and you're like entering into a contract with a supplier, like, you don't want the supplier to know like what the state of your existing contracts are, right? Because then they're just going to price to those or higher, right?
Yeah.
So like there's a million reasons why privacy in finance is important, right? So that to me is like one of the immediate applications and use cases that we look at. So we've talked to a lot of different stablecoin providers. You know, we'll be issuing native stablecoins on Aleo day one, not just for USD, but also for like, for example, like the GCC countries are looking at issuing a CBDC and using Aleo as the platform and the backbone for that. Now, the first thing that comes up, though, whenever you talk about finance on a privacy-preserving network is compliance, right? People are like, how do you make sure bad guys are not using this, right? And, you know, we talked about my Army career in the beginning. Like, I spent years of my life fighting ISIS terrorists in all over the world, right? And so no one more than, like, there's not a person in the world besides me. No one wants to not enable those people more than me, right?
Yeah.
At the same token, though, like I think it's not an either or, right? And this is kind of the magic of zero knowledge cryptography. So the other aspect I've talked about earlier was kind of all these elements of identity, right? And so you can actually make a payment system where you can basically KYC effectively at the time of payment, or you can have some rules around who is allowed to pay for what, when, and going to where. And you don't have to reveal any of that data. You can just prove that it's correct at the time, right? And so that's why identity is another application area that we look at. And actually, like identity, if you think about like just the web, is not even a solved problem. Think about age verification, for example. Think about, let's just take a simple example: buying wine online, or buying like I'm a gamer personally. So if you like Steam, you buy a game on Steam. It's like first thing pop up: are you over 18? Scroll down to whatever 18 years ago is and click yes. You know, like there's literally no check for that. Like there's not like anybody could click that. My 7-year-old son could click it, right? And is that a good thing? No, it's actually not. We should solve that problem. That's not a good thing. I don't want my 7-year-old son to see that content, right? But there's no way to solve that today. But Aleo, this technology is a way to do it, right? So you can basically have this identity. You can solve these identity problems that are unsolved on the web too, and then that itself can be a foundation for a compliant yet private payment system. Basically, it's like better cash, right? It's smart cash, where you can make sure that you're not paying the wrong people, and you can set up whatever rules you want and then prove them in zero knowledge. Those are the two immediate application areas that I'm really excited about. Two more that I'm also excited about are, I think, this is a longer conversation, but I think gaming and Web3, like there's a extremely bright future. I don't think the world is quite there yet to kind of see, but I could imagine a world of like player-owned games where everybody's taking part in that economy, potentially earning real asset values in that economy. And I think why is Aleo? It's like a lot of networks have this thesis that like gaming is going to be big. Why is Aleo different? Well, because again, like the logic of the game, if it's private, like it could be more interesting. Like think about Battleship, right? The whole point of Battleship is like I don't see where your ships are, right? So to do that, you need some kind of privacy preserving thing like Aleo gives you. And then the last one is ZKML. So 2 acronyms. I'm going to end on the cringiest acronym, ZK and ML, right? We got to talk about it because it's hype right now. So, but no, I think like it's kidding aside. I mean, ChatGPT is an amazing application. I think it's already changed like the internet and how we think about search and information. But it's limited fundamentally by the fact that it's effectively just trained on all of Google search results, right? It's not trained on the text that I send to my wife, right? Why is that? Because I don't want someone else to have that information, right? But you can imagine a world where like future large language models or future AI models in general are trained on some data that's personal to you, but like you don't have to reveal that data to that third-party server that maybe authored that model, right? So now reality is I think that's a little further out too, because I think there need to be some hardware breakthroughs before we get there. But these are the kind of things that are enabled in this paradigm of zero knowledge computing, which Aleo is building. So
love it. Yeah, I love it. There's so much there that I wish we had more time to break down, but we're starting to bump up against the top of the show. But I always ask this, like every guest at the end, what have I not asked you that I should have asked that we wanted to talk about?
Oh man, I don't know. We covered a lot of really good ground. I mean, maybe something I would say is like, advice to anyone who would come in and build in this space. Maybe you didn't ask me like, what's it like to go from being a guy that knows nothing about technology or crypto to a CEO of a zero knowledge cryptography
Yeah.
company.
I mean, what is that like? I mean, you also were at A16Z, which is huge. I mean, they're like one of the best venture firms in the world. And share away.
I guess
share away.
Look, I guess I'll just say, maybe I'll start like, how did I get to A16Z? I wanted to know how the underlying technology worked. I enrolled at a class at Stanford, a cryptography class. I took none of the. I had taken none of the prerequisites. I had no idea how to even program, and I just enrolled in this cryptography class. I got a 20% on the final exam. This is now on public record, I guess, so everyone's going to know how bad I am. But I got a D in the class, so I passed. But like, I knew nothing, and I just went for it, right? And I ended up taking another couple classes from that professor, who it turned out was a technical advisor to A16Z, and he passed my name over to the partners when they were looking for an analyst, and one of the partners happened to be a former government treasury person named Katie Hahn. So Katie Hahn has her own fund now, but anyway, we hit it off, and I got a job there. So the point is, though, I would have never even been in that position had I not just jumped face first into that cryptography class. And I think this is one thing that a lot of people get intimidated, like a lot of people, especially non-technical people, get intimidated by this information because there's a lot. But I'm telling you, if you like, and I am the best example here, if you just learn a little bit every day, you just understand one concept, and you add one new concept a day to your base of knowledge, you will be amazed the distance that you could go in 3 years. And you'll realize how much more there is to learn. It's kind of like the classic, like the more you know you don't know. That's totally true. But I also think it's incredibly powerful, and it's incredibly motivating and exhilarating to kind of have this understanding of how things work. And it doesn't take, like, yes, it's just like any big thing. It's like running a marathon. 26 miles is a long way, but how do you do it? Well, you run 1 mile at a time. Right? You run one step at a time. You do one thing at a time. You train, you build your way up. And that is, I think, useful advice for everybody in technology. Forget crypto. I think crypto is unique because it's so dense and there's so many interconnected concepts. But that's the advice I would give anyone who's looking to get deeper into the space, is like, don't wait. Just do it. Just learn one new concept a day. And there's no reason you can't get as far as I got and further.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's good advice. I mean, I'm also non-technical. I mean, I have written some Rails applications. I'm self-taught, like using courses online, but I'm terrible. I'm a terrible software developer. And I also wasn't that good at school, like in general. You know, I guess I was like an A and B student, but only in like history and, you know, language classes. I have like learning differences and stuff. I'm like ADD and dysgraphia, the whole 9 yards, you know. This is the kind of thing that I'm good at. It's like networking, talking to people, sales, partnerships, that kind of stuff. And I think, like, for the non-technical people listening, I really want to encourage you just to get the base level of knowledge of the space, because you do need to know a little bit about the technology, but the space needs you. They need people who can communicate, who can sell, who can build relationships, like, because there are a lot of really, really talented technical people who don't have that skill.
And there's not,
and
like, it's wrong. Like, I think sometimes, like, we make it like an either or. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes crypto is too much about celebrating, like, the engineers or like the scientists that invent this thing. It kind of just becomes like, it's like magicified. You know, everyone's like, whoa, okay, like, it's all magic and we just got to kind of worship it. And, like, it's obviously amazing. And it's, of course, the space would not exist without the incredible work of all those people. But remember, like, last time I checked, like, my bank is not running crypto rails, right? So, like, this technology is still not in the world, right? And that is a social, that's a business thing. That's an economic thing. It's like high level. It's like me convincing you that it matters, right? And so it's like, it's good to be able to zoom in at a very deep technical level, because then you can understand it. But it's also very important to be able to zoom back up and be like, why does it matter? This is why it matters, and have that. And I think we have to be able to do a better job of doing both. I think way too often in crypto, we're like, hey, it's cool because it's like cool and like new tech.
ZKML.
Whatever, right? ZKML, right? It's like
amazing.
Like, yeah, it's acronyms, you know, like, but like, I think it's just like the why is really important. So,
all right. Well, thanks for coming on. I think it's a great note to end on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed being a guest, and I hope to come back again someday. I'll let you know how things are going at Aleo.
100%. Yeah. All right.